good? Okay. Thank you. Good morning, committee members. Bienvenue à tous.
Welcome this morning.
The clerk has advised me that everybody appearing virtually has been sound tested and are fine. We do have a quorum, so with that, I will call meeting number 116 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills, Social Development, and the Status of Persons with Disabilities to order. As you'll notice, I assume you familiarized yourself with the new technology in the room. Before we begin, I would ask members appearing in the room to respect the translators. By doing that, please don't touch the microphone boom if you do not have to. As well, when you're not using the earpiece, please keep it in the assigned location to prevent feedback and sound popping that can cause hearing damage to the interpreters. Today's meeting, again, is taking place in a hybrid format with members appearing virtually as well as in the room. You have the option of choosing to participate in the official language of your choice. For those in the room, translation service is available using the headset provided. For those appearing virtually, click on the globe icon at the bottom of your surface. Choose the official language of your choice. If there's an interruption in translation services, please get my attention by raising your hand in the room. Virtually, use the raised hand icon. We will suspend while it is being corrected. Again, I would remind those participating, please direct any questions or inquiries through I, the chair. Wait until I recognize you before proceeding. Today's meeting, pursuant to the order of reference of December the 6th, 2023, the committee is commencing its clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-322, an act to develop a national framework to establish a school food program. In case members have questions, technically we have with us today two officials from the Department of Employment and Social Development, Erin Gillespie, Director, Social Policy Directorate. Good morning. We have Hugues Vaillancourt, get it right? Director General, Social Policy Directorate, and I understand Mr. Vaillancourt has to leave at 9:30 to attend another committee meeting. And also before, we have with us this morning Mr. Cormier, the sponsor of the bill. He is replacing Mr. Long for today's meeting. So now we will begin with the formal part of reviewing the bill. Pursuant to Standing Order 75-1, consideration of Clause 1 and of the preamble are postponed until we get to the end. So we'll now go directly into the clause by clause. Shall Clause 2 carry? No? Oh, sorry. What's happening?
She said no, but they have to vote on the committee must vote on the clause 2.
Yes, okay. So again, shall Clause 2 carry? Comments on Clause 2? No? Okay. We need a vote then on Clause 2. Clerk, please record a vote on Clause 2.
Mr. Fragiscatos?
Yes.
Monsieur Cormier?
Wait.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Coteau?
Yes.
Mr. Van Bynen? Yes. Mrs. Gray?
No.
Mrs. Falk?
No.
Ms. Ferrari?
No.
Mr. Aitchison?
No.
Madame Chabot?
Oui.
Ms. Zarello?
Yes.
Yeas pour 7-7, nays contre 4-4.
Clause 2 is carried. Clause 3. Clause 3, we have an amendment. Ms. Gray?
Thank
Wish
you.
to move the amendment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to move the following amendment, that Bill C-322 in Clause 3 be amended by adding after line 15 on page 3 the following. I. Examine the applicability of the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act to food and the transportation of food sourced under the school food program and, where applicable, examine ways to exempt them from the application of that act. And, Mr. Chair, this really is about bringing down the price of food. We know that that food costs have gone up. There was just a very recent Food Bank Canada poverty report card that talks about the price of food and how much more families are paying. And we also had heard at a previous study from not-for-profits as to how much their costs are going up specifically from food banks, but it would really be for any profits that are any not-for-profits that are serving food, and how their costs have gone up in actually be able to serve the clients that they serve. And so this is a way of looking to actually bring down the cost of food and to analyze how that could be applied, both for the cost of food and also the transportation of the food that is utilized for a program. Thank you.
Discussion now on the amendment has been moved. The amendment is in order to be tabled, so we'll open for discussion. Mr. Fragiskatos on the amendment.
And with all due respect to our colleague, Mr. Chair, that's not the intent of the Conservative amendment here. If it was the intent, the amendment would include, and actually it would be prominent in the amendment, a focus on climate change and its impact on the rising cost of food, which in fact is going down but has increased in recent years. And we know, because of analysis after analysis, that climate change is the key factor in all of that. And I see nothing, no surprise, on climate change in the amendment. For that reason, our side will not support.
Further discussion on the amendment of Ms. Gray. Ms. Ferrari on the amendment.
Thank you, Chair. Just to my colleague's point about climate change, you know, farming being what it is and how challenging it is. I think most of us have farmers in our riding. We know that it determines the cost and availability of food for sure. This amendment, however, is actually not prohibiting or hurting farmers in any way. In fact, it's probably helping them be able to do their job better and be able to make food more affordable, which is the basis of this bill, to allow children to have access to food in a cost of living crisis, which my colleague Ms. Gray has said. And given the dire circumstances, the Food Banks Canada report card that we've never seen these numbers ever in history, I think this would be a very fair amendment, and perhaps our colleagues across the way would be open to something. But this is a very important amendment to help make food more affordable. So I'm not sure why we're not getting support from the other side.
Thank you, Ms. Ferrari. Seeing no further discussion, I'm going to ask the clerk to call a recorded vote on the amendment of Ms. Gray. Madam Clerk.
Mr. Fragiskatos?
No.
Mr. Cormier?
No.
Mr. Collins?
No.
Mr. Coteau?
No.
Mr. Van Bynen?
No.
Mrs. Gray? Yes. Mrs. Falk? Yes. Ms. Ferrari? Yes. Mr. Aitchison? Yes. Madame Chabot?
No.
Ms. Zarrillo?
No.
Yeas pour 4, nays contre 7-7.
The amendment has been defeated. We will now recall. Seeing no further discussion, shall Clause 3 carry? Recorded vote on Clause 3.
Mr. Fragiskatos?
Yes.
Monsieur Cormier?
Oui.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Coteau?
Yes.
Mr. Van Bynen?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray? No. Mrs. Falk? No. Ms. Ferrari? No. Mr. Aitchison?
No.
Madame Chabot?
Oui.
Ms. Zerillo?
Yes.
Yeas pour 7-7, nays contre 4-4.
Clause 3 is carried. And we'll move, we have a new clause 3.1. Madame Shabat, à vous la parole.
You have the floor. I'm getting used to the new tools here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, dear colleagues. Our amendment, it's not surprising, I think, comes as in an effort to improve the bill and with all respect to areas of jurisdiction of Quebec and the provinces. And furthermore, the bill in its preamble makes reference to the fact that health and education are exclusive areas of jurisdiction of the provinces. And even if the discussion and debate that we've had on that bill is in terms of a national framework, I think you can all understand that in the narrative that's been put forward on this bill that no one wants our children and students to be hungry when they go to school. That's an important principle, I do believe. And in Quebec, we therefore have already put forward a school food program in our schools. So it surprises me that I should be the one to have to do so, but just to illustrate that this is an exclusive area of jurisdiction of the provinces, and under the Constitution, which is not what I normally talk about, but I think it's very clear on the responsibilities of the various levels of government. And it's under Section 93, each province's legislature can exclusively deal with subjects in health and education. So once again, we're not at the right level of government with this bill, and that is what produced our amendment, which is intended, given that health and education are exclusive areas of jurisdiction, the government of a province may choose to be exempted from any obligation that may arise out of the implementation of the national framework. And so, in other words, the implementation of a national framework could impose obligations, and given that it is not an area of federal jurisdiction, it has to be very clear that the provinces may choose to be exempted from any obligations that arise out of this framework. So for us, this is fundamental to the support of the Bloc Québécois for this national framework.
Madame Shabat, as chair, my responsibility is to ensure the committee proceeds according to procedures outlined by the House of Commons. Based on that, I must rule on all proposed amendments. Bill C-322 provides for the development of a national framework to establish a school food program. In developing the framework, the minister consults various stakeholders, including representatives of provincial governments, but the bill does not provide for the possibility for a province to be exempted from any obligation that may arise out of the implementation of the national framework. As House of Commons procedure and practice adopted by the Commons, third edition states on page 770, an amendment to a bill that was referred to the committee after second reading is out of order if it is beyond the scope and principle of the bill. Therefore, and for the above stated reason, I rule the amendment inadmissible. No debate is allowed, but my ruling can be challenged. Ms. Gray?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to challenge the chair. And I believe that Ms. Chabot's amendment here is very reasonable. Oh, okay. I challenge the chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The chair's ruling has been challenged, which brings us to The chair has made a ruling, and there's no debate. You can vote on my ruling. Madam Clerk, call a recorded vote on the ruling of the chair and explain to.
So, members, the question is, shall the chair's decision be sustained? So that means that if you vote in the affirmative, you're voting in favor of the chair's ruling. If you vote in the negative, you're voting against the chair's ruling. Mr. Fragiscatos?
Yes.
Mr. Cormier?
Oui.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Coteau?
Yes.
Mr. Van Bynen?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray?
No.
Mrs. Falk? No. Ms. Ferrari? No. Mr. Aitchison?
No.
Madame Chabot?
No.
Ms. Zarillo?
Can I just get clarification on the vote? What is a yes and a no?
Yes affirms my decision that the amendment is inadmissible.
Okay, yes.
So, yeas pour 6, nays contre 5.
The chair's ruling has been upheld. We'll move to Clause 4. In Clause 4, we have an amendment. Ms. Gray?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to move the following amendment, that Bill C-322 in Clause 4 be amended by replacing line 18 on page 3 with the following. Ting out the national framework, and that includes a projection of transportation and production costs that would be incurred by the school food program under the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act, and cause the report to. And again, this aligns with the further amendment to look at costs that go into food that could potentially be used by a food program, and the rationale is in order to look at how to bring down the cost of food. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The amendment is in order and is now a debatable discussion on the amendment of Ms. Gray. Ms. Falk?
Thank you very much, Chair. This is something that I definitely see as a no-brainer, given the fact that our country is so big, and there are areas of our country that are only actually accessible by air, and sometimes ice roads in the wintertime. So I think it's important that transportation and the production costs that would be incurred it's sensible to see that they should be included and have that projection cost. This would give also, if this PMB does pass, the opportunity for cost projection and knowing what Canadians would be paying for specifically this school food program, even though we do know that something like the carbon tax does cost Canadians more to be able to feed their families. So this would just help with transparency with the bill.
Thank you, Ms. Falk. For Mr. Fragiscatos?
No surprise, Mr. Chair. My comment from before to CPC 1 applies here. In fact, it will apply to the rest of Ms. Gray's amendments. They are incomplete, to be polite about it. If one is serious about dealing with the costs of food, one has to focus on climate change. There's no way around it. And to the point raised by Ms. Ferrari before, we've been to farms just because we represent urban areas. I mean, I was at a farm a few weeks ago, a bean farm, and we talked about climate change there. Climate change is the key factor when it comes to the rising cost of food. Any amendment that is serious will include that point. I see nothing of the sort here, and for that reason, our side will not support what has been proposed.
Thank you, Mr. Fragiscatos. Ms. Falk? Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I would just state that anybody that is in this place that is serious about the price of food and the fact that food has become unaffordable for Canadians, for families to be able to put food on the table, I think it's actually very naive and ignorant to claim that, or not to claim, to not take into account the taxes that have been put on by this Liberal government for our farmers. Our farmers sequester carbon at astronomical amounts in Saskatchewan. We know that. We know that they are getting taxed at every end on every every portion of their from seed, before seed even, in planning, all the way to production, and then that cost is being relayed to the consumer. So I think just to state that this is about climate change, by not recognizing, specifically these Liberals and the NDP, not recognizing what our farmers are already doing to sequester the carbon in the ground, is absolutely foolish. And to not recognize that having that the carbon tax is costing Canadians to be able to put food on their table, I just think is very foolish.
Thank you. Ms. Ferrari on the amendment.
Thanks, Chair. Listen, we're here today. We're talking about the national school program that the Liberals and NDP have put forward to provide food for kids, because we have the highest usage in food bank history. 1 in 4 of those people accessing a food bank, which is 2 million people a month. We've never seen this ever in the history of Canada. 1 in 4 of those people are children. And so the Liberals and NDP have put forward this bill, okay? It sounds great. It sounds really good. Let's give kids breakfast. Let's give kids access to food at school. As my colleague Ms. Chabot has said, nobody can disagree with that. The problem is, like every other bill they've put forward, the devil is in the details, and we've just been proven that yet again by my Liberal colleague's comments. And he had the audacity to respond today to say, I've been to a farm. I've been to a farm. You said a farm. Good for you. I'm so glad you've been to a farm. I think, you know what? This is unbelievable. We have an amendment put forward by my colleague, Ms. Gray, that is doing the groundwork for accountability and transparency of where money is going. You have seen this over and over again with the Liberal NDP government. You've seen it in housing. They don't build houses, they build bureaucracy. You've seen it in childcare, and now childcare facilities across this country are closing down because they cannot afford to stay open, because in the agreement signed by the federal government, they are going bankrupt because of the administrative fees, because there wasn't transparency, there wasn't accountability, and we tried to do that in this committee where we put forward amendments asking for transparency and accountability of where the money is going. This is taxpayer money. This is actually just saying, how much fuel is it going to cost? When we live in the largest geographical country and you have rural northern communities where kids are actually starving, this is a very reasonable amendment. And if my Liberal colleague is so serious about him visiting a farm and wants to know how they're doing, then add that in here. Let's negotiate. If they are serious about people going hungry, then change it. But this amendment is so common sense. Where's the money going? How's it being spent? And how much money will actually feed children as opposed to paying for gas and the cost to produce the food? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Van Bynen, did you want to interject? And I have Mr. Rillo.
Just briefly, Mr. Chair, just to enlighten Ms. Ferrari, I grew up on a farm. I didn't just visit it. I grew up on a farm, so I think I understand that situation. And if there's a concern about housing and it not going forward, I would invite her to come to my constituency. There are 400 apartment units that have gone up on Davis Drive, and we broke ground for an additional 600 apartment units that are now going forward because the GST has been waived and the business case makes it feasible for that apartment unit to go forward. But my question is, if we have this information, what are we going to do? If we find out that there's a higher transportation cost for rural and northern areas, does that mean we're not going to supply food to schools in those areas? What are we going to do with this information? And why do you want to differentiate and exclude some remote communities simply because the cost is so high?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I could just get some clarity, please. I'm under the impression that we're looking at a PMB right now. We're not looking at the government bill on National School Food Program, and I understand that private members' business, there's no spending attached or allowed to those bills. So if I could ask maybe our witnesses today or even the clerk if they could just clarify what we're looking at today, because I think the Conservatives are confused.
Anybody want to take that question? The first part?
Yes, so my understanding of the private members bill is to develop a national framework and in working with provinces, territories, Indigenous partners, and to report back and table that report. So that I have a similar understanding. The bill in and of itself doesn't have program funding associated with it.
Thank you, Ms. Rillo. Is that the answer you were looking at?
Thank you.
Ms. Falk.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's unfortunate that some members around this table don't know what we are actually doing today. We are going through a private members bill, which is a framework. Frameworks, I would suggest, is when you are doing the bones of something. Well, maybe I wouldn't make the assumption because I feel like this government likes to consult in hindsight. We've heard that especially with the disability benefit, where disability advocates and those with disabilities were not properly consulted. Either were the provinces and the territories, which would follow up with the previous amendment by our colleague Ms. Chabot around this table. But any common sense piece of legislation that we're looking at, we want to make sure that all the areas are looked at. And there's been a lot of points made, and some of us actually that sit around this table represent large rural ridings where it takes 4 hours by vehicle just to get from one area to another, let alone some of our colleagues that are not around this table but in this house that have to fly places. So I think that it's absolutely in order and makes sense for us to be discussing the transportation, or to have that put in the bill to the projection of the transportation and the production costs of food, especially if this is the framework of the bill that the government wants to flag and advocate for their national school food program. And I think just to go back to the farming comments that have been made around this table, if there's been that many members that have been to a farm around this, in every party in this place, I have yet to meet a single farmer who supports the carbon tax.
Exactly.
I have hundreds, thousands of farmers in my riding and that I have met across this country, and I have yet to meet one that says, yes, government, tax me more. Literally. I've gotten phone calls from farmers where they are a mixed operation. They've got cattle and they've got grain. They're running on no sleep because cows don't come when you tell them to come. They're born when they want to be born. So they're running on no sleep. Bankers are calling. Bills are due. I talked to one farmer. He is having to settle a $1 million bill. Do you know how much he's paying in carbon tax? Where this government has shown no decrease in admissions. I don't know what's being done with that money. I know there's lots of money that goes to consultants and to other scandals that are coming up from this government. So I just don't understand how this is a framework bill that is, again, as it was said by a few colleagues around this table, to feed children, which we are all on board with. We discussed this at the last meeting we had. Absolutely, children need to be well nourished. But if you are taxing the farmer who grows the food, the trucker who ships the food, Mr. Van Bynen, you can do this, but it's true. Consumers, Canadians are the ones that are going to pay for that. So if we're looking at a bill that's going to supply food for school and the taxpayers paying for it, and it's the federal government that is attempting to champion this, why would we not look at the transportation costs? It's just common sense. It's common sense.
Thank you, Ms. Falk. Ms. Gray, on your amendment.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to point out that, again, this amendment is looking at transportation and production costs. And we know that this private member's bill is basically to set up a framework to put together a plan for a plan that then reports on that plan. And so what are you going to be reporting on? We know that it's been reported that the average family this year is going to spend another $700 on food for their family. We know that the costs are going up, and it includes the farm, but it also includes, as what's in the amendment, transportation and production costs. So I think what we quite often forget is that not everything that we consume is farm to table. They're quite often farming products are turned into value-added products, and I just had a group of a group of business owners in my office the other day that are food producers, and they take food from the farm and then they turn it into other products, and there's all costs along the way. We know that on April 1st, the carbon tax just went up 23%, and it affects the entire value chain. And so for us, for a private member's bill that is in fact putting together a plan to not be looking at these kinds of things, it really should. This opens up transparency, and it allows for a better analysis as to the actual costs of food all the way along the value chain, and that's the intention of this particular amendment. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further discussion, Madam Clerk, we'll call a recorded vote on the amendment of Ms. Gray to Clause 4.
Mr. Fragiscados?
No.
Mr. Long? Monsieur Cormier?
No.
Mr. Collins?
No.
Mr. Coteau?
No.
Mr. Van Bynen?
No.
Mrs. Gray?
Yes?
Mrs. Falk? Yes. Ms. Ferrari? Yes. Mr. Aitchison? Yes. Madame Chabot?
No.
Ms. Zarrillo? Ms. Idlud?
No.
Said no.
Yeas pour 4-4, nays contre 7-7.
The amendment has been defeated. We'll now go to a vote. Ms. Cirillo left. She replaced with. A recorded vote on Clause 4. Madam Clerk? There she is. Okay.
Mr. Fragiscados?
Yes.
Monsieur Cormier?
Wait.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Coteau?
Yes.
Mr. Van Bynen? Yes. Mrs. Gray? No. Mrs. Falk? No. Ms. Ferrari? No. Mr. Aitchison? No. Madame Chabot?
No.
Ms. Idlud?
Yes.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5-5.
Clause 4 is carried. We'll now move to Clause 5. We have an amendment. Ms. Gray?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move the following amendment, that Bill C-322 in Clause 5 be amended by adding after line 33 on page 3 the following. 1.1, the report must include a comprehensive breakdown of costs incurred under the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act for each item of food provided under the school food program. And again, this goes back to looking at the cost of food and what is attributed to the cost of food. We know that inflation has been high, and in fact, food inflation is higher than the actual inflation rate. And so this is important so that we can better understand the costs that are going into the cost of food. And as I had said earlier, the Canada Food Price Report released said that the average family will be spending $700 more this year on food. So since this particular piece of private members' bill legislation is to put together a plan, you should be looking at all aspects of the plan and the costs that are going into the plan, and that can lead to how you mitigate and how you might be able to mitigate some of those costs. So we think that this is important to put this in this bill. Thank you.
Discussion on the amendment. Ms. Ferrari?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, we've put forward another amendment here when we're looking at the National School Food Program put forward by the Liberals and NDP. And what we've seen in this committee today, so the Conservatives have put forward amendments saying we would like to add in reasonable, common sense pieces of this legislation that says, how much does it cost? How much does it cost to transport the food? How much does it cost to produce the food? It kind of makes sense when you're budgeting for something, right? It's honestly the most common sense thing. If I'm going to go buy something, I want to know how much it is. And we have a member on the opposite side who says, why would you want to know that? What? Does that mean you're not going to do it? Why would you want to know the costs? I'm sorry, excuse me? There's something missing here, Mr. Chair, through you, that makes zero sense. This carbon tax was told to the people, and I've had this conversation multiple times. Canadians are pretty amazing people. They'll say, you know what, I don't have a problem helping out. Tell me where the money is going. You know what, you go to a grocery checkout and somebody says, hey, can you donate a buck or two for this cause or this cause? And most Canadians will say, yeah, like, where's my money going? This Prime Minister told Canadians that this carbon tax was revenue neutral. We now know that was not true. In fact, it's $1 billion that they've generated in revenue. Where is that money? Nobody seems to know. And yet we've put forward amendments. This is another one of their wonderful marketing schemes. We're going to feed children. We're going to make sure the kids are fed, even though we've put kids in the most food insecure position they've ever been in their lives. In history. This is not dramatic. This is not rage farming. This is the worst it has ever been in Canadian history. Food Banks Canada says this has never happened ever. So we put forward an amendment and say, hey, we are asking, can we make sure that when this rolls out, that we know how much it costs? Because guess what's going to happen? The exact same thing that has happened with housing and the exact same thing that's happened with childcare. You are not going to have enough money because you are not budgeting. You are not accounting for where the money is going. And guess what? The kids are going to get zero food. Why? Because you are not knowing the cost before you. This is so simple. And yet they are proud to sit on the other side and say, we're not voting in support of any of these amendments. Okay, then what do you want here? What do you want? You just want people to blindly follow you and say, yeah, for sure. I mean, that's great. Just take my money. Tax me harder. Right? So I just think this is exactly what they've done. It is Groundhog Day every day. They wade into provincial jurisdiction. They say, we're going to come and save you. We're going to come and help you. And then they pull it back, like they just turn the tap off and leave people high and dry. And they've done it with childcare, they've done it with housing, and now they're going to do it with this this food program that will not feed any children. Mark my words, write this date down today. Because we will come back to this clip in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years, when every province is saying, we don't have enough money, it's not feeding the children, it's not being dispersed properly, that the gas charges are too high, food production prices are too high, we didn't budget for this properly. Mark my words, that is exactly what will happen if they don't approve these amendments and take this seriously.
Thank you. We have Ms. Falk, Ms. Falk, and then Mr. Aitchison, I believe maybe Ms. Gray.
Thank you.
Ms. Falk.
Thank you very much, Chair. And so this amendment is saying that this report must include a comprehensive breakdown of costs incurred under the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act. And for each item of food provided under the school food program, I think that's important also. But I think just to break this down, there are families out there now at this time of year budgeting if they can go on a summer vacation, if they can take their kids to the lake, if they can go camping, if they can do these things, and they're sitting down and having these conversations before they spend the money. They're literally making the plan to see if it can work. And so, I mean, this type of behavior is expected of businesses. In order for a business to actually just stay afloat, they have to know what their costs incurred are, what their expenses, their projected expenses are, to know that if they can stay in business or not. This is the same with families. There are so many families that are having these very difficult, stressed conversations, which actually is then affecting the children because they're carrying around this weight of, my parents can't pay the bills. I hear them arguing about this. I hear the stress of, oh, we can't have that. We can't do this. We can't afford it. And I would, at minimum, expect government to have the same thoughtful planning in this. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, we already know that this NDP Liberal government has riddled the next generations with debt. We know that. We know that, like, my children and their children's children are going to be paying the debt that this NDP Liberal government has incurred. So I would just think, at minimum, especially for these kids, that in the framework, we would have a projection. Because the ironic part of this is who's going to be paying for it? The kids getting the food. So, I mean, at very minimal, I just don't see why we wouldn't have this reporting in there, unless the government wants to continue, this NDP Liberal government wants to continue covering up scandals and covering up where money goes.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. Mr. Aitchison, on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I must admit, it's quite compelling, the arguments that are being made by my capable colleagues here about understanding, how much money it's going to cost and tracking. And I keep seeing a theme here, actually. I think back to some of the other things we've discussed in this committee, whether it's, the homelessness strategy, they weren't really measuring that, and these are the kinds of things that unless you're able to measure it, you don't know if you're succeeding or not. And I had an epiphany. I realized that I'm like, well, maybe, despite the fact that, feeding children is obviously crucially important. We want to make sure that kids are nourished and they can learn. But you always want to do it with the best value for dollar possible. I mean, but I keep thinking back to this moment where the Prime Minister said the budgets balance themselves. So maybe the problem is that the whole team is kind of infected with this notion that it doesn't matter how much money it costs, because it just doesn't matter. And yet it does. And so I think this is why this is why we're struggling a little bit with why they're so opposed to this amendment. And we keep hearing, if it's about carbon tax and they're worried about what we might find out about what the carbon tax actually costs on the amount of food, I can't imagine they would be, because we keep hearing that people are better off because of the rebate. So they take the money and then they give them some back and they're better off. And if that's the case, if it is better, then I just don't understand why there's a problem with tracking the costs, knowing what we're spending. I don't know. I'm just really perplexed at why they don't like tracking the costs of anything.
Thank you, Mr. H. Ms. Gray, on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to be clear, this amendment is talking about a comprehensive breakdown of costs incurred under the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act for each item of food. So this is referring to the costs of the items. Now, we know that the Liberals don't like looking at numbers. We know that after 9 years of the NDP Liberal government, they don't like looking at the causes of their policies and how it's affected people. And so you can see why they don't want to support this, because they actually don't want to step back and do a, as it says, comprehensive breakdown of costs. They're not interested in actually looking at the causes and being transparent. They don't want to look at the numbers. And we know that the carbon tax went up 23% on April 1st. We know that it's on track to go up to 61 cents a litre. And we know that across the entire value chain for food, from the farmer to transportation to processing and operations, to transportation again, to warehousing, to retailing, all the way across the value food chain, there are costs that are incurred, and they don't want to analyze this. It's really obvious. They do not want to look into this. And so, again, this amendment is to look at a comprehensive breakdown of costs. They don't want to do this. They don't want to look at the numbers. Forget the numbers. They'd rather just have a tagline and have a title. They actually don't want to break down and look at the causes of how things are affecting people, why the average family's food costs are going up $700 per family, why food banks and other not-for-profits are struggling because their costs are going up on what they're having to buy. They don't want to analyze this. And it's really evident that they don't want transparency, and they just want to stay away from the numbers. And it's more about photo ops. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. Seeing no further discussion, Madam Clerk, record a vote on the amendment of Ms. Gray to Clause 5.
Mr. Fragiscados?
No.
Mr. Cormier?
No.
Mr. Collins?
Nope.
Mr. Coteau?
No.
Mr. Van Bynen? No. Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
Mrs. Falk? Yes. Ms. Ferrari? Yes. Mr. Aitchison? Yes, of course. Madame Chabot?
No.
Ms. Idlut?
Akapunga, no.
Yeas pour 4-4, nays contre 7-7.
The amendment of Ms. Gray as CPC 3 has been defeated. We will move to shall Clause 5 carry. A recorded vote on Clause 5, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Fragiscados?
Yes.
Mr. Cormier?
Wait.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Coteau?
Yes.
Mr. Van Bynen?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray?
No.
Mrs. Falk? No. Ms. Ferrari? No. Mr. Aitchison?
No.
Madame Chabot?
No.
Ms. Idlut?
Angapunga, yes.
So, yeas pour 6, nays contre 5-5.
Clause 5 is carried. Shall Clause 6 carry? A recorded vote on Clause 6.
Mr. Fragiscados?
On Clause 6, yes.
Mr. Cormier?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Coteau?
Yes.
Mr. Van Bynen? Yes. Mrs. Gray?
No.
Mrs. Falk? No. Ms. Ferrari? No. Mr. Aitchison?
Yeah.
No.
Madame Chabot?
No.
Ms. Idlut?
Angapunga, yes.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5-5.
Clause 6 is carried. That concludes the clauses. We'll now move to the administrative part of the bill. Shall the short title carry? Okay, so I see no, I need a recorded vote on the title.
Mr. Fragiscados?
Yes.
Mr. Cormier?
Wait.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Coteau?
Yes.
Mr. Van Bynen?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray? No. Mrs. Falk? No. Ms. Ferrari? Mr. Aitchison?
No.
Madame Chabot?
No.
Miss Idlut?
Angat po nga, yes.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5.
The short title is carried. Shall the preamble carry? See no, okay, record a vote on the preamble.
Mr. Fragiscados?
Yes.
Monsieur Cormier?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Coteau?
Yes.
Mr. Van Bynen?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray? No. Mrs. Falk? No. Ms. Ferrari? No. Mr. Aitchison?
No.
Madame Chabot?
No.
Miss Idlut?
Angat po nga, yes.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5.
The preamble is carried. Shall the title carry? Recorded vote.
Mr. Fragiscados?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Coteau?
Yes.
Mr. Van Bynen?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray? No. Mrs. Falk? No. Ms. Ferrari? No. Mr. Aitchison?
No.
Madame Chabot?
No.
Miss Idlut?
Angat po nga, yes.
Yeas pour 6,
Madame.
nays contre 5.
The title, Monsieur Cormier, did you have a question?
Well, I think the clerk forget me for the vote, but it's a yes for me.
My apologies, Monsieur Cormier.
Oh, good point, Mr. Cormier. The title is carried. Shall the bill carry? Recorded vote on the carrying of the bill.
Mr. Fragiscados?
Yes.
Monsieur Cormier?
Oui.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Coteau?
Yes.
Mr. Van Bynen?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray? Mrs. Falk? No. Ms. Ferrari? No. Mr. Aitchison?
No.
Madame Chabot?
No.
Miss Idlut?
Angat po nga, yes.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5.
The bill is carried. Shall the chair report the bill to the House? Recorded vote.
Mr. Fragiscados?
Yes.
Monsieur Cormier?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Coteau?
Yes.
Mr. Van Bynen? Yes. Mrs. Gray? No. Mrs. Falk? No. Miss Ferrari? No. Mr. Aitchison? No. Madame Chabot?
Oui.
Miss Idlut?
Angat po nga, yes.
Yeas pour 7, nays contre 4.
The bill has been approved to be reported in the House. I want to, as been my practice, but I need the direction of the committee. Is it agreed that MP Cormier present a report on Bill C-322 to the House that has been adopted by majority? We need a recorded vote. Everybody's okay. Thank you. There's consensus on Mr. Cormier reporting the bill to the House. Okay, members, we're going to spend for a few moments. Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, we have just a little bit more time here. Mr. Chair, I would like to give verbal notice of the following motion. Given that a recent report from the Salvation Army indicates that nearly a third of Canadians continue to feel pessimistic about the future of their personal finances, 1 in 4 Canadians continue to be extremely concerned about having enough income to cover their basic needs. Canadians' extreme concerns about cost of living continue and are not subsiding. About 1 in 10 Canadians continue to be extremely concerned about basic human needs, such as shelter and food, are being affected by a natural disaster or emergency. Mental and physical well-being continue to be an extreme concern among roughly 1 in 3 Canadians, as is being able to afford activities they want to do. 3 in 4 Canadians continue to face food security challenges with nominal upward trends. This wave, more more have skipped or reduced the size of at least one meal because they couldn't afford groceries. Among those who accessed a food bank in the last year, over half, 61%, were first-time users. Nearly 3 in 1 Canadians faced challenges managing limited financial resources in the past year, with nominal upward trends across all challenges. Over half of Canadians faced issues impacting their health. This wave, there was an increase in Canadians deprioritizing medical expenses due to costs. Canadians facing housing security challenges has increased, with more needing to move in with family because they can't afford housing or were living in unsustainable housing conditions. While many feel they can meet their financial needs in the next 12 months, over 3/4 are stressed out about the increase of the cost of living. The committee recognizes and reports to the House that Canada is facing a rapidly worsening affordability, housing, and food insecurity crisis. And pursuant to Standing Order 1081A, the committee invite the Minister of Finance and officials, as well as representatives from the Salvation Army, to appear before the committee to testify in relation to these findings as soon as possible for no less than 2 hours each, and that the committee find additional resources if necessary to facilitate this meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to speak really briefly on this, I am letting you know, as I said, verbal notice that I will be bringing this forward. And in particular, considering that we were talking about food costs today and food insecurity and how families are struggling to afford to feed themselves, I think that this is really appropriate at this time. And the report from the Salvation Army was quite shocking with the numbers and the comments that came out of that report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. Was it Ms. Ferrari? Did you? Okay, and then Madame Chabot.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would also like to give a verbal notice of a motion. Excuse me. Given that a recent report from Food Banks Canada indicates that A, Canada has reached a critical turning point as poverty and food insecurity worsen in every corner of the country. B, nearly half of Canadians feel financially worse off compared to last year. C, 1 in 4 Canadians is experiencing food insecurity. D, 33.3% of Canadians are experiencing an inadequate standard of living, while 23.7% of Canadians are experiencing a severely inadequate standard of living. And that Food Banks Canada has graded the federal government's commitment to addressing this crisis as a D. The committee recognizes and reports to the House that Canada is facing a rapidly worsening affordability and food insecurity crisis. And pursuant to Standing Order 1081A, the committee invite the Minister of Environment and Climate Change and officials, as well as representatives from Food Banks Canada, to appear before the committee to testify in relation to these findings as soon as possible for no less than 2 hours each, and that the committee find additional resources if necessary to facilitate this meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for letting me put that on verbal notice. And I think, obviously, you know what, we are the Standing Committee on Human Resources and Social Development. This is a critical issue across the country right now. It is our duty as elected officials to do everything we can to have these tough conversations and to ensure that actually people are able to eat. This is dire. I don't know what else to say other than that word. And, you know, I got to co-sponsor the breakfast and launch of the report card from Food Banks Canada, and not one NDP member was there. Not one. And I think this is a great opportunity for us to actually do this, figure out what we can do in terms of making life more affordable. It's pretty shocking in Canada when we can't afford to feed our kids and ourselves. So I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ferrari. Madame Chabot. Madame Chabot.
And on another subject completely, because you said we would take a few minutes, I would have liked to take a few moments to have instructions in terms of the report, any dissident report on the bill that has just been passed. I imagine that Madam Clerk will inform us of that, because, as you know,
Thank you, Madame Chabot. You are correct. It is the directive of the committee to put a timeline on that. I'll ask the clerk to speak to it.
So, yes, supplementary dissenting opinions can be attached to any reports that the committee presents to the House. And so the committee would need to determine a deadline that it would want to impose on itself for accepting dissenting and the supplementary opinions. Because the committee requested an extension to the House, technically the 60 sitting day deadline was on Monday, but because of the extension, the committee has an additional 30 sitting days.
So the wish of the committee to pick a date to deal with the issue of that Madame Chabot has raised. What's your suggestion, Madam Clerk? Let's look at the calendar.
There is flexibility. If the committee wants the report to be presented to the House next week, then perhaps next Wednesday, end of the day, or next Friday, end of the day, and that would allow the report to be able to be presented the week of June 10th.
So do we have agreement on next Friday as the deadline for submitting dissenting reports? Good, Madame Chabot? Bon?
Oui, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Madam Clerk.
Okay, that is...
Just on
Ms. Gray?
on that, Mr. Chair, just if the clerk could provide some instructions on that, because it's a little different with the private members bill than perhaps with the study. So,
yeah, you are correct, Ms. Gray. The clerk will circulate the decision the committee made on the timeline as well as the instructions to clearly come back to the committee. If there isn't anything further, I'm going to suspend for a few moments to move briefly in camera to conclude a discussion that got suspended on Monday when we lost interpretation. Suspend for, we'll give it 5 minutes. Suspend.